Hello everybody, welcome to the stream where I'm going to do some world building stuff. I had intended to do this every Friday, but I think I've only done it once. So there we go. And I also realised just before the stream that I didn't need my headphones because I don't have to hear anybody. So that's cool. So yes, welcome to the stream. We are world building my D&D world, which is one of several worlds that I work on. What you see here is the work that we did on it last time. Well, a fair amount, actually. I haven't read through it again since, so we'll do that first. So I started off with the sort of cosmology idea and a few questions that I wanted to answer. I thought, hello Biscuit, welcome, thank you for the look. Yeah, so I thought we start with a fairly classic cosmological start. We have this sort of magical primordial soup that gradually forms into the elemental planes, and from that forms the material plane somewhere in the middle. We came up with this idea of having a sort of elder species, and initially we didn't know what that was, some kind of celestial being, and that they were highly magical, and then we have the next stage of evolution, if you like. It was the elves, and then humans and the rest, and they populate the material plane. And the idea being that the inherent magicalness of these species decreases as you go through. And you can tell that these are my notes because there's things that I know in my head that we discussed last time that are not at the top here. So clearly I need to sort these notes out. Let's scroll down. So then we had a quick discussion about, do we have a geocentric or a heliocentric universe? So geocentric being the classic medieval idea, the Earth is the universe, and there's heavens above and hell below, that sort of thing. And that the stars and heavenly bodies are just in this vault in the sky. It's a nice fantasy approach. Heliocentric is more modern. Everything goes around the sun. And then you have the sun and the solar systems go around things, And while it'd be nice to have that sort of situation, and I had this sort of cool idea that maybe rather than portaling between dimensions, you're portaling between planets in the solar system, but you don't realise it. It's kind of cool, but it's probably something I'll explore for a different universe. Then we had a thought, is there a moon? Moon is very important to our culture as humans, in that it determines the tides, it determines the calendar, or did. I mean, okay, we're less determined by the moon for our modern calendar, but the period of month is roughly in line with the lunar cycle. So I like this idea that there's a moon with a little moon that orbits around it. So, keeping with the sort of geocentric idea, maybe these are just a mother and child deity figure that dances through the sky. Something like that. I haven't actually talked about deities yet. That's something that we need to sort of come up with. And then we got into, I suppose that's one of the nice things about going through notes in order, is that you get to see my thought process as we go through. So I then had this idea that perhaps the first big conflict is between the elders. And all this other question, where do dragons come in? Dragons are the most important thing ever. Dragons are cool. I like dragons. So then I sort of started breaking it down into a sort of timeline. So we start off with a single, consistent, fundamental group of elders. And between them you have this philosophical split that I suppose also results in is metaphysical the right word? Change? Because, I mean, these elders are more sort of ideas rather than actual physical beings at this point. They're magical essence, I suppose. So you got the Celestials and the Primordials. And these sort of split, and you have the celestial beings, what we eventually sort of know as deities and angels and demons and devils and those sort of classic things and D&D mythology. And then you have the Primordials ultimately becoming the dragons. And then those sort of split further. So here we go, our first major conflict. The elders are created as the elemental planes form out of the primordial. So you have planes developing at the same time, these sort of magical beings. And then I suppose you get that sort of order versus chaos thing starting out. So the order elders become the celestials, and the chaos elders become the primordials. And these essences change as they change. The Celestials managed to win the battle, I suppose, in terms of magical essences and form the material plane. I like that. Not win as such, but achieve a new equilibrium where a material plane now exists. So it's a sort of build versus destruction. So they're building out whilst constantly battling the primordial chaos around them. And eventually they got to the point where you're, haha, we've got this material plane now. And they work on strengthening it, and you get this sort of equilibrium. And the Celestials then sort of look after the material plane, whereas the Primordials are happy in their elemental chaos. And then you've got this thin barrier that is created, so you have a split between the planes. And then we've got this second conflict, which is between the Celestials themselves and how they go about building out the material plane. I've not really thought about that, because you then got to start thinking about deities and godly portfolios and domains and that sort of thing. So I'll probably work on that a little later. I want to start building out some lore in terms of how these sort of heavenly bodies come about, you know, the sort of early creation myths. And in doing so, you start defining who the gods are. Also my own sort of experience and knowledge in various sort of human pantheons is not that great. So I don't have that inspiration to draw from as yet. Most of my knowledge comes from sort of Christian mythology and Tolkien mythology, strangely enough. I haven't actually done that much reading on Greek or Norse or those sort of things. I've done a little when working on our Southern Reaches campaign with Essa, but very little. Hello, Sophie! Welcome! I am talking about my D&D world building. Welcome! You love mythology. That's cool. I'm quite into sort of aspects of mythology. I just haven't read that much. I remember we did some reading up on Roman gods when I was at school. I'm making you jealous, Biscuit. But you've already done this work. How can you be jealous? I've got literally a page of notes, and that's it. So yes, I did do a little bit of Roman stuff when I was at school. But I was quite young, can't remember that much of it. I was mostly interested in the military side of things, and the battles, and that cool stuff. I suppose we did cover some of the Greek myths, but it was more, again, the Greek myths were more the stories. So you had Jason and the Argonauts, a little bit about Hercules, you know, those classic stories, and not so much about the pantheon itself. Egyptian goddesses. Again, Egyptian stuff was something that I did in primary school. I remember spending a lot of time in the British Museum, and people have various opinions about the fact that we got a lot of stuff in the British Museum. I'm not going to express opinions on that. But of course I was too young to actually have an interest. And maybe someday I'll go back and learn a bit more. And the ones I should know more about are the Celtic gods, those sort of things, and I know nothing. Again, we did some research into that when looking at Southern Reaches, and yeah, I started reading and realised I knew nothing. So there we go. I know more about Norse gods than I do about Celtic gods. And even then, not that much. I learned some of the Norse stuff actually through Tolkien, because I got a book several years ago relating Middle-earth mythology with Norse mythology and where its roots are. So Tolkien originally started looking at building an Anglo-Saxon mythology because a lot of it had been lost, and a lot of that is based on sort of early Norse. So for instance, Gandalf is based on the Anglo-Saxon character of Woden, who himself is derived from Odin, who everybody knows. That sort of thing. You've learned about all sorts of stories from all over the world. We'll have to have a chat about that sometime, Sophie. Just because, as I say, there's very little that I know. So yeah, I'm lacking a lot of inspiration for those sort of deity stories, and I like chats and tea. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll arrange it. Chats and tea. And so some of you may not know, I have an interest in astronomy. And so you have all sorts of stories that relate to the various constellations. And I'm trying to remember where our modern constellations come from. I think they're mostly sort of Roman and Greek. Welcome back, Biscuit. But it's interesting that if you look at various cultures, they have different constellations. So the Aborigine cultures, for instance, they have completely different set of constellations to modern Europe. Native Americans have their own constellations, and they're all based on cultural stories. Because particularly the native tribal peoples, stars were so important for navigation. The stories were what helped them remember what the constellations were, and where they were, and when they appeared. And so it was all related to how they navigate. Same with the early sort of Polynesian Pathfinder cultures. So that sort of thing is something that I would like to eventually come up with, but I don't have the inspiration for it at the moment. And it's one of those things I think I almost need to develop more of the world to understand the culture of the world before I put together the deities. Because actually, and I think I remember Matt Colville talking about this, is that a lot of pantheons tend to be more about the culture than they are about the pantheon. So yeah, so that's our sort of second major conflict there. So once we have the material plane, you've got the celestial elders who sort of become our deities, and I need to start defining who they are, some specific entities. So as I say, I've got this idea further up that I've got two moons. Smaller one that orbits the larger one. Hey, Spades. Yes, Happy New Year. And yes, that does still count. It counts particularly since I'm still writing my Christmas letter, which I haven't sent out yet, because I haven't finished it yet. So there'll be people receiving a Christmas letter from me in February. So yes, so I've got this idea for the moon, that you've got a larger moon with a smaller satellite, and the story relating to it will be a mother and child twirling in a nice waltz across the sky or something. There we go. Right, so that's that sort of thing. Then further on we have the... Can you see my mouse? You can see my mouse. Right, you have the third major conflict, which is the primordials. So these are the creatures that remained in... They were the elder species that remained in the elemental planes. And they then have a... so they have this sort of split between them. So just as you have the sort of conflict in the celestials that define the groups there, you have the in the primordial groups, they're more different types of primordials, and they eventually become the dragons, and they split into these three groups. You've got those that want to destroy the material plane and pull it back into the elemental chaos. This is the chromatic dragons. You've got those who want to be... they've been slow to the uptake, but they realise that, okay, this material plane is a good thing. Let's help it grow. And so this is where the metallic dragons start having an influence on the material plane. And you got the neutral gem dragons, which I haven't thought much about yet, because I've not read much about gem dragons. As I put there, I need to learn more about these, because my knowledge is lacking. Could have a smaller moon in rotation that at times looks like it's further away from the bigger moon to show that, yes, a mother is close to a child, but also must let go. Yes. Or it being a sort of cycle or something. So we're going with the geocentric idea of the universe is the material plane, and you've got this heavenly vault above it. It's not actually a solar system. So this moon will be, from the point of view of the people on the plane, it's a perpetual it's there for eternity. And so, although the pattern could change, I need to write that down, it will always come back again. So, let's put that in there. So we have motion. Need to move my keyboard over a bit. Whereby child you feel like as a world builder you should always have a self-insert deity. Yes, potentially, but I also have a self-insert NPC. Because this is the world that I built around Archimedes. So it's Archimedes' story first, and the world that I'm now building to encompass that story. What is the physical size of the world? It will be a sort of Earth-like world. Whether it's spherical, I don't know. I think it probably will be spherical. Just because I like the idea of going out west and ending up east, you know? Also, that's an interesting idea if you think about map projections, right? A map projection tends to open out like that. So, if you go off one side of the map, you end up on the other side of the map. But it doesn't do it that way. If you go south, you don't end up on north. You just end up in a different part of the south. It would be interesting to see a map projection that actually split it out the other way. So actually, if you go off the bottom of the map, you end up at the top. Wouldn't that be curious? Be very weird. That was a little side thought. And the question then of, why does the map open that way? And not around the equator? Philosophical thoughts with Antan. So once we've sort of determined these first generation of species, so we've got the deities, angels, devils, demons, and the dragons. We then got the second level, which is the elves, and the question being, where do the elves come from? Thank you, Salsa. Because I like the idea of the elves being the first species on the plane. It's quite traditional now. I don't know whether it's an idea that Tolkien invented or whether it's influenced through other ways. The Tolkien idea being that the elves were angelic servants that were there, sent out into the world to prepare the world for the humans. And kind of like that idea. You get a sense that then that they are you get a sense that the elves are more magical than the other species, and they're sort of, they get that magic from the sort of central primeval magic, if you like. But they are not beings of magic. They're sort of in the middle ground. So yeah, I like the idea that they're sort of angelic servants. And over sort of several generations, you got to the point where you have elves on the material plane who go, well, actually, we want to live our lives. We don't want to be angelic servants anymore. We want to be a species. And they sort of split from their deity masters, as it were. So that's that idea. And that was as far as we got last time. So I've just spent half an hour talking through what we've already done. Space, talking about the map. That would be unusual. You like it though. There's no real reason why a map can't be oriented east-west instead of north-south. I guess it comes down to how easily it is to find north with a compass and orient. That is true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it makes sense because if you've got the compass, you're doing it, aligning it by magnetic stuff. It also makes sense in terms of the way that the sun rises and stuff. That all goes sort of east to west. Yeah, I mean, some of the early maps of Earth, I remember seeing a map when we were studying, looking at it when I was a child. And you had some of the early Middle Eastern maps of the world, and of course they put the Middle East central, and the Earth is just a disk. And trying to map out the world based on your known interpretation of the world is very an interesting process, because you've got nothing to reference it against. This is something that Essa and I are exploring with Southern Reaches. In the idea of the players drawing their own map as they go. So what you end up with is a map that's actually very different to the map that we originally drew. But it's based entirely on player knowledge on the ground. Which is a fascinating idea. So I laid out for myself some questions to ask, or some things to do next. So start defining the early stages of the material plane. That I'll leave for now. Possibly. There are some more easier questions that I can ask myself first. So, how are the major continents and the cultures formed, and what are they? That's a big question. Start outlining the major eras of the world. You want multiple layers of history, at least 3, and I'll explain that in a minute. How did previous civilizations get wiped out? If they were more magical, more advanced, why are they hidden? Why, that should be why aren't they here? Divine influence, self-destruction, fall and splitting of an empire. Same could be about what I said about deity, and going back to what I said about the constellations. It's all about relating the unknown and unknowable to something physical, something you can have control of. Yeah, exactly. So the idea of having multiple layers of history, at least 3, is it doesn't matter really how much you define your earliest layers of history. They need to have some definition to them, but you don't have to go in too much depth, at least initially. But it's important to have multiple layers, because if you just have a single modern layer of history, and you go, right, the world started and now you're here, it ends up feeling very shallow when you're playing in that world, or when you're living in that world, or writing stories in that world, because there's nothing to excavate. You don't. A lot of our modern cultural stories are influenced by previous eras and that sort of thing. So by having some older eras in there, you can have a situation where your characters are wandering on, and it makes it simple to just slip in a little bit of lore from a previous era. This artifact is from the ancients. They were much more magical than we are. Tea time. Yeah, you can say, right, this is an artifact from the previous era. They were much more magical than we are. We have no idea how this works. And that instantly provides intrigue. And it could be nothing more than just an item, a mysterious item. But it hints at something that came before, and that adds depth. There have been some south up or north up maps that laid it out with it being going north to get south and all that, but it's normally more artistic or political statement against stuff rather than being used as real maps. Yes, I've seen a map which has New Zealand in the centre, not in the centre, well, in the centre horizontally, and its south is up and north is down. And that's yeah, it was made as a statement, but it was an interesting map. Will you have ruins and mysteries still in the world in the modern age? Yes, absolutely. So the idea, at least, is that there will be sections of the world and dungeons that relate to previous eras. So you could have a thing where you excavate an area, where you find an area that's been excavated, and it's like finding the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, you know? Except when you go in there, it's the old Indiana Jones. It's full of skeletons and undead and things, rather than, you know. That'll give you the opportunity to tell the downfall of eras and when knowledge is lost. Yes, exactly. And I think one of the suggestions that I think I got from Colville is he generally suggests that the previous civilizations were more advanced than you are now. So it's the idea of being sort of in the Middle Ages in Europe, and there was the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, and before that you had an Egyptian Empire, you know, Persian Empire. I don't know the orders they go, but you know what I mean. And it's only in the really modern era, so since the Industrial Revolution, that we've actually got to a point where we've surpassed, as far as we can tell, all previous eras, technologically. Up until that point, we were still moderately behind. Well, there was, you always got to that point of non-modern industrialization, if you like, and you got the size of an empire that then just became too big to sustain itself. And then when you include magic on top of that, that becomes really interesting. So you've got the idea that in a lot of, well, certainly in D&D, well, in the Forgotten Realms, because I'm more familiar with that, you had a number of eras where the downfall is related to magic. Magic is the defining aspect to this. The sort of early point, you had the Netherils. You had these floating cities, and they got to the point where you had this one character who... Okay, so the archmages are always looking for a way to ascend, to attain godhood, right? So one of the archmages worked out a way of creating a spell that allowed him to take the power of a god. Now, I think this is very dangerous in terms of world creation, because yes, I suppose in some ways you've got to work out a way of how people attain godhood, but I personally like a sort of isolation layer between them. But there we go. But yeah, so there was this one character who had created a spell that allowed him to acquire the steal the abilities of a god. And the god he chose was Mistra, the god of magic. And instantly discovered, the moment that he cast it, that in stealing the power of the goddess magic, he immediately destroyed all magic. And that basically ended that first era. That's kind of cool. A little bit too earth-shattering for my liking. Yeah, I mean, I need to adjust my timers, because that one's not appropriate for this. I want you to backseat. I want you to give me your ideas. So let's start by looking at ages. Eras. I don't so far have three major eras. Having three major eras, I think, gives you sufficient depth. So far we have let's say the era of elves. Help if I can spell. Then we have, I don't know. And then we have we want three events before current era, so don't know, and then current era. Yeah, I'm open to more eras. The more you have, the more depth you have. But if you have too many, The earliest ones, you're less likely to encounter in terms of myths and legends and stuff. Thank you for gifting a sub to Sophie Spates. Would the eras be the same with all lands? It's an excellent question. I haven't worked out how many continents there will be. We could have an era that ends with the splitting of continents. That would be interesting. The moons could be the cause of an era's downfall, some form of alignment issues, maybe. Or, if the moons are sort of celestial elders that ended up in the sky, it could be that there was an era of conflict that resulted in deities ending up sort of being permanent features. The more lands, the more complex stuff gets. Yes, that's true. I don't want to isolate myself to a single continent because that becomes too simple. Having an element of complexity adds depth. It doesn't have to be too much complexity. In fact, you don't want too much complexity. But yeah. Would the era coincide with your underworld? What do you mean by that, Spates? So we could have some kind of deity conflict. And we already got that to a certain extent. Yeah. So that will be an era of celestials, I think. And then we have an era of elves. And then one of those will be a era of advanced civilization. Now, the question being, do we want that more recently in history or further back in history? If we have it further back in history, that makes it more mysterious. Right, does the underworld... Okay, I see. Do actions on the material plane affect your underworld? I haven't really thought of the underworld as such yet. just as I haven't really thought about celestial planes yet. That's a good point. I would consider my underworld to be sort of celestial planes. So all the celestial planes would have would operate the same sort of way. And I would consider them to be sort of eternal. So almost as if time has stopped. Is it like Mount Olympus, where the gods are looking down and acting where they see fit? Yes. Yes. But I don't necessarily see it as the gods are restricted to that time frame. Although if they operate in different time frames, that then gets very weird. So celestial plane. Let's talk about that. So let's start with the idea of how deities are aligned. So deities are aligned by portfolio, not by alignment. And then we want the planes exist in their own time frame ish, but deities also can down and events. Okay, back to eras. What are the first two and how are they separated? So, you probably weren't here when I went through it earlier. So, you have sort of three stages of species, if you like. So you start off with the Celestials, and these are the sort of magical beings that become deities and what have you. Then you have the Elves, that are sort of partly magical, and then you have the humans and other species that are mundane, right? So the Celestials are species that create the material plane, and I'd imagine the first era is that era of creation, and as the various deities in that creation come up with their own interests, there are areas of conflict between them, and at the end of that era, you have a situation where you developed the early sort of culture and lore of the material plane, and the celestials that are there become deities or elements in the sky. You get the sort of post-creation existence. And I think the first arrival of the elves signifies the end of the first era. So any sort of magical primordial conflict happens in that first era, primarily. I think the era of the elves is they have got to have their own conflict, the elves, and some kind of thing that defines the end of that. I mean, yes. So from the very beginning to the current era, you've got several thousands of years. Let's say several. Certainly between the last three, you're looking at about 1,000 years each, I would suggest. So you're not going to have any elves in the current era you're probably not going to have any elves in the current era who remember the creation. Depends how long elves live. Although, I mean, that could be an interesting situation if the eras are shorter and the elves can remember the pre-human era, much like with Middle-earth, then you get that sense of age with them and the sense of youth of the human cultures, and that generates a tension between them because there are elves who remember a time before humans came. Yes, I agree. So yeah, the second era is definitely the elves learning to cope and going from being a child species to being a mentor species. Me. I ought to write some of this down. So, dawning of creation. Deities develop their portfolio. Big conflict resulting in deities excelling themselves to their own planes, leaving Imperial and the elves. I love that Biscuit is asking the important questions. Would the elves emulate the gods and make other species at the end of the second era? No. So the elves do not have the power of creation. They have the ability to guide nature magically, but they do not have the power of creation. So the other species are the creation of the gods. Hang on a moment. Let me get there. Find a way from being not creation. Guild, guide, and develop nature. So, introducing the new species. So, the elves were originally created as a sort of servant race. Again, being heavily influenced by Tolkien here. So they were originally influenced with because the gods looked at things from a big picture. And they go, well, in big handfuls, the world needs to have land, it needs to have weather, it needs to have plants and things. And they're still of a sort of mostly chaotic nature. But they gradually sort of form themselves into these sort of portfolios where as they slowly turn into deities. but they create the elves to look at the finer details of the world. So, okay, I plonked a forest here. It is now your responsibility to look after that forest. And guide and nurture it, right? And have the elves start to create the gradually develop sort of early civilization. So I'm thinking sort of places like Lothlorien, from Middle-earth mythology, you know, the sort of big forest city, those sort of things. What we need is to end the era, or the second half of the era. There needs to be some big conflict. Now, whether that's that conflict is among themselves. So the Celestials are actually physical beings at one stage on the material plane. Yes. So let's scroll back up. So we originally started out with this primordial soup, right? It's a lump of elemental stuff, right? That gradually coalesces into elemental planes and the elder species, right? It's just one elder species initially. This elder species itself splits, and there's those that want to create a material plane and those that just want chaos. And that splits into what I've called the Celestials, and originally called them the Primordials. The Celestials eventually win that conflict and create a material plane, and they become beings on that material plane, but with full magical power. It gives you a lot of scope to have very magical places in the world where they inhabit the world. Yes, absolutely. So they become your sort of deities, your celestial beings, your early devils and demons and those sort of otherworldly creatures. The primordials then become dragons. So you've got your three types of dragons all come out of the primordials. The metallics become more interested ultimately in joining the material plane and nurturing that. The chromatics are still the chaotic. They want to destroy the material plane and merge it back with the elemental chaos. They could leave the plane willingly, but that is less interesting. Because drama comes from conflict. And I think you end up having to have some kind of I think you've got to have some kind of sort of earth-shattering conflict to actually define a material plane in the first place. Because if it's a plane where the Celestials live and they create themselves, why would they ever leave? So, yeah, I like the idea of a big conflict. That could be an invasion of the Imperial plane by the Primordials. In order to protect Imperial plane, the Celestials to themselves to form a barrier. Something like that. Yeah, something like that. So either it's a conflict within the Celestials themselves as they define their own domains, and the resulting combat causes them to have to expel some and the rest leave. Which interestingly is what Matt Mercer did on Critical Role. Or this one that it gets invaded by primordial elements from the elemental planes, and they have to fight to keep them out. The trouble is that if I do that way, and they form a barrier against the primordials, which they will have to a certain extent anyway, how do I let the dragons in? Unless there are holes. But if there are holes... Never-ending wheel of time. Yeah, I mean, that will happen to a certain extent anyway. We could have, so not necessarily a wheel of time, but movements or alignments of things shift over time. Which weakens the barrier in various places, allowing dragons to come through from the something like that. As much as I like that, I think the dragons will become dragons anyway. But the idea of the chromatics being wanting the chaos, so the chromatic dragons and the more chaotic ones, they want to merge the elemental plane back with merge the material plane back with the planes, the elemental planes. Now, what we could have, rather than doing it voluntarily, we could have, as a result of the very first conflict, where the elder race and the elder species splits into celestials and primordials, we could have part of that conflict resulting in the celestials forcing the primordials to be confined in physical bodies. Maybe that's how they managed to then create the material plane. So, the conflict between the celestials bodies and result. I probably ought to put this further down, because then I'm tracking an order of notes, as these notes tend to build on the notes above. But I'll do that in a minute. The conflict between the Celestials and Primordials results in the Celestial forcing the Primordial into material bodies, and they this in this way they give themselves the breathing room to final to create the kind of like a personal Tartarus, where they are forever forced to live in a weak body to pay for the perceived wrong done to the Celestials. I don't know what a Tartarus is. I'm gonna remove that. So, the end of the first era could be an invasion of the material plane by the dragons. The chromatic dragons. It was the prison the Titans were put into by the Olympians, an uprising by Zeus and his brothers over their creator. Right. Yeah, except in this case it's not a new generation overthrowing the older generation, they're both the same generation. But one's preventing the others from inhibiting creation. So it could be an invasion of the material plane by the chromatic dragons. In order to protect the material plane, the Celestials have to sacrifice themselves to form a barrier. dragons come through later times. The metallic dragons have made their peace with the existing material plane. Stay behind to fight the to remain after the also explain why dragons are so cranky, forever looking away to obtain their original body. Yes. Although certainly the chromatics, the metallics, I don't see as, I see them as being a lot more benevolent. Yeah, I suppose the metallics are the ones who sort of made their peace with it, and for their assistant, the Celestials. How do I spell Celestials? Grant the X. Where is my spelling today? Right, metallics, the ability to shapeshift. And so, and then with the populace, the there we go. The populace, population. It is a word, I swear. So yes, this is how the metallic dragons acquire the ability to shapeshift. And so they attain some of their original freedoms as a result of aiding the Celestials in protecting the material plane against the chromatic dragons. No, You're not a distraction at all. This is why I streamed this. Because you need people to be able to sort of bounce ideas off. Otherwise, you just end up with my own ideas, which tend to be quite derivative. Left to my own devices, I'd just rewrite Middle-earth with dragons. With more dragons. We were starting to fill it out. It's going quite nicely. Well, the other thing that relates to this, which we'll get down to here, so in my world, in the present day, there is a place, a magical place, called Tempest Keep. It was originally just a title that I gave Archimedes. Because I like titles, I like long-winded, ridiculous titles. So one of Archimedes' titles is he is the guardian of the eternal fire of Tempest Keep. The eternal fires of Tempest Keep. And there are 4 guardians for the 4 elements. And Tempest Keep is this sort of sacred place. Originally, there were 4 separate locations, and there were locations where the barrier was weakest, and the elemental planes sort of seep through. So you had the fire plane seeping through in the east. You had the water plane seeping through in the north. You had the plane of air seeping through in the west. And you had the plane of earth seeping through in the south. And each of them, the early elves, appointed guardians for each of these. And I've just determined why. So the guardians originally existed not to protect the portals, but to prevent things from coming through. Whereas later, they became guardians to prevent beings on the material plane using the power and the magic that they could obtain from the elemental planes. I like that. I like that a lot. Right, so Now that gives an interesting lead in to some of the things that could have happened during the other eras. Because if you're protecting, if you're preventing people from using the power of elemental magic, somebody at some point must have tried to have done that. And that becomes its own story. But I need to take a break there because I need to pop to the bathroom. I will go and refill my tea. So I will be back in probably about 10 minutes. In the meantime, you can all sit there and listen to some music. So, I'll be right back. How do I feel that during the Second Era, the elves rebuild a civilization? Chromatic dragons take their time and finally corrupt a number of elves, thus taking the upper hand in a long arc war. So the Celestials create more species to balance the odds. So they kind of become the first sort of demons in a way, don't they? Or devils. I can never remember which is which. So from the elemental plane, they exert influence on the elves as they're coming to power, and some of the more powerful archmages start using elemental magic, or the magic from the elemental portals, and try and open those portals to let the dragons through. Thus needing guards, yeah. I'm liking the idea of the dragons also being the major conflict towards the end of the Second Era. One of the thoughts I had whilst on break was that the moon and her child were not celestials, but they were elves. That one of the elves had begged the celestials to protect, and in doing so, they got turned into the moon. Which is kind of similar to how the Even Star was created in Silmarillion. But yes, okay. So let's go with that. So, over the course of the Second Era, Elven Oh, mages. Skill. From mental planes. These are the so it's more medieval. Much to the upset of, I'm sure, many people. I am not actually a fan of steampunk. Well, no, that's not true. There are certain parts of steampunk that are really cool, but there are also a lot of aspects of it that I don't like. I tend to stick more to the sort of Tolkien-esque Middle-earth type stuff. Trying to portals. To the elemental things through the divine barrier to allow the dragons to burst through. Wreak havoc. That's not how you spell havoc. Mages. One. I'll get on to that in a minute. space. No. Other form groups of guardians to try and close the portals. And the events, creatures, more creatures coming through. And this is where a lot of other elemental type creatures break into the material plane from. So things like early forms of tieflings and those sort of things. Actually, are tieflings elemental? They could be. Other remove and try and close it, prevent more creatures from coming through. The generation later the guardians. Oh, right. So I have a weird idea about humans as a species. What if they are originally a subspecies of elf, but because of an impending battle where numbers will be critical, the creators take all magic away from them so that they can mature faster, have the advantage of being sentient, and can learn how to fight as a physically mature being faster than elf. Interesting. I don't completely like that.
They talk about another kind of world.
What are you afraid of?
I like the idea of humans coming about as a result of an elven sacrifice.
Lost in old ways.
Again, it there's the sort of Tolkien angle on that of elves being nominally immortal and choosing a mortal life, and then becoming sort of very long-lived humans, as it were. But I don't know.
They talk about another kind of world.
I mean, you could have the idea of
What are you afraid of?
a rate of attrition,
I'm lost in old ways.
which is similar to what you're saying. So you have a rate of attrition in that the elves being long-lived don't reproduce as much, so they're dying out quicker. And actually, to get an edge in that combat, you need a faster developing species. Now, whether that starts as a subspecies of elf or whether it's a divine creation, the problem that you then have is that, so this is because this is a D&D world. Hey Fliss. Because this is a D&D world, all species will eventually have equal capability of magic. So, I mean, ultimately, even though elves are sort of magical, partially magical beings, at some point in the modern current era, they have no more capability, or not much more capability with magic as humans and other species. Okay, they're magical, they're immune to charm, they don't have to sleep, that sort of thing. I wonder if we can use it as a punishment. I'm grateful for you being here, Bliss. Even if you are tired. Yeah, I'm wondering actually what we could do is say, well, I've just got tea. But thank you. What we could do is say, right, there's this bunch of archmages that opened the portals and let the dragons through. Their punishment for doing so is to lose all their magic. And become human. Although making humans a punishment seems a bit off. There's got to be some boon to it other than the repopulation thing. Or it's a punishment as a species that good question. I haven't really thought about the relationship between species. I tend not to think of relationships between species as a whole. The elves tend to be xenophobic, or at least cautious, because one of the things that will happen in later eras is that the humans become civilized faster and they start chopping down their forests and that sort of thing. But that's later. And the other thing is that humans can't be special. We've got to somehow account for all species coming in at around the same time. Because again, D&D, people can choose anything. If it were just my world that I were doing for a story, I'd limit it to a small handful of species, but we've got to account for a number of others. So part of my original thought was going back to the idea of the elves were originally servants, caretakers for the world, until the Celestials created the other species. And the elves' role was to prepare the world for these other species. And then they just all come at once. But on the other hand, it does feel a bit yeah, I like the idea that they start off as allies, because the elves would start off by introducing them to the world. But you get the problem that humans, you then get the age difference in that the humans develop faster and they'll start begrudging the elves for their age and that sort of thing. And the elves will get to the old man syndrome of get off my lawn. You know? That sort of thing. We also had the problem that if the Celestials dump a whole load of new species on the world at a time where, hey, we need lots of new species to fight against these evil things, then that is a bit convenient. Unless what could happen is you could have a situation where the elves have the run of the material plane for a period, and they are preparing it for the massive species. The new species come, and the archmages that I've mentioned here are actually a renegade group. They don't like the fact that they've now suddenly lost sole control of this material plane, and they have to now babysit a bunch of new species. And so they then start to try and open the portals to cause chaos, and they sort of try and do a deal with these chromatic dragons. So, okay, we'll let you through, but you've got to destroy all these new species. We could have it like that. And then the other elves then that could be how the new species learn to use magic. The other elves go, we're not going to survive unless you guys learn magic. So we're going to teach you. Yeah. So you then, what happens is the chromatic dragons then burst through, and you basically have a humanoid army on one side, and a dragon and elven archmage army on the other side. An era-ending event, like running out of cheese. More cheese, Gromit! So, let's write this down. No, you're a biscuit. So, the new species enter the material plane created by the Castiles. Group of 11 elven archmages. Renegade. Renegades. Angered by the fact that the plane longer becomes solely the they write a bargain with the that's how you spell bargain, isn't it? Bargain. No, not bargain. Yeah. With the dragon. Bring to them into the material plane. They wipe out species. Well, the idea being that if I'm going to run 3 people through, there will be species that are more common, and it will be the main ones. But I won't prevent people from playing species that they want to play. But they may be rarer, and I may have to come up with specific lore to explain their existence, where they came from. I mean, there's a lot of species that are easily explained by they came from the Fey realm. I don't have a Fey realm yet, but you know, that sort of thing. They wipe out all the other species. Right, delete those. The Archmage stop trying to open. Wreak havoc. Close the pod. Right. That's still true. We could. Okay, the non-renegade elves teach magic to the younger species so that they can help fend off the coming of the gates and that also leads neatly into the next era, where you have younger species abusing their power of magic. Now, do we make them human? Human? The era of the human? Question mark? Archmage Empire. Big question mark on that one. What, whether to make it human? Maybe an era in between. So what would you put in between? Yeah, I'd imagine. If you imagine from this point, so the end of the era of elves, there's 1,000 years between that and the development of the human Archmage Empire. That's 30, 40 generations? So, I mean, you could make it 300 years, and that'll be enough. If if these species only live sort of 60, 70 years, right? You only need... Yeah, exactly. I'm imagining there being another era in there, but I want a sort of advanced civilization, probably a couple of 1,000 years before current era. Because I have another plan for the in-between bit. So, I don't know when to place the current era. Whether... Right, yes. I don't know when to place the current era. So, the current era is at some point in the life of Archimedes. Archimedes lives over 900 years. That's a long time. So I could set it around the story of his early life. He's human. Yes. Archimedes is a 900-year-old human. And the reason he's a 900-year-old human is he received a blessing from a dragon. Whether that will actually happen in any of the D&D games where I'm playing as Archimedes, that's beside the point. So I suppose I ought to tell you about Archimedes if you don't know. So Archimedes is a human sword mage. A sword mage in 5e is... yeah, exactly. Especially after the lore we've come up with. A sword mage is half-caster. It's a class that exists in 4th edition. But not in 5th, and having made that class in 5th edition, I can fully understand why they didn't do it. But it fits in between the fighter with magic and the wizard with martial ability, in terms of the arcane scale. So it's kind of an arcane equivalent of the paladin in where it fits. But it's basically a person who is equally adept at magic and fighting. But it's melee only. Hence, sword mage, they use swords. Archimedes has a sentient sword. This is something that I've determined years ago. Mainly because early in my life of reading D&D stuff, I encountered the concept of a moonblade, which is a Forgotten Realms thing from as early as a second edition, I think. And it's basically a sentient elven blade, that one of which was owned by each of the elven noble houses. I liked the concept, but I wanted a human character. But I wanted him to have one of these swords. So I came up with a reason why Archimedes was raised by elves, and that somehow he would have a special sentient sword made for him. Rather than it being sort of classical, just a sentient sword, I came up with the idea that Archimedes' sword is a dragon blade. It contains the soul of a dragon, an ancient dragon at that. Although, with the lore that we've established here, dragons are as old as time, so it'll be even older than that. And that dragon is called Nineveh. And she was, in her life, a gold dragon. And she basically gave up her soul to be fused with this sword, and it became Archimedes' sword. And in the stories that I wrote, spoilers for anybody from my D&D group who don't know Archimedes' background, that hasn't actually happened yet in our campaign, but may do. So Archimedes had found the love of his life, for want of a better word, in this town. The town got invaded. Okay, no, she turned out to be the princess, or one of the princesses, a princess. The town got invaded. The king's youngest son was kidnapped, and Archimedes basically got exiled from the kingdom, until such times as he managed to rescue this son. That's a very, very, very broad explanation of that bit. I've written a short story. You can read the story. It makes more sense. So that bit in our D&D campaign has happened in my backstory. And he's now on the journey to go and find this son. In the stories that I wrote later on, well, I wrote the stories before the campaign, but for later on in Archimedes' life, he encountered a boss fight where they were fighting this boss who had the child captive. And basically they lost the fight, and during the course of this fight, Nineveh materialized as an actual dragon. And a very Deus Ex Machina solution to the problem. Materialize, kills all the bad guys, heals everybody, and one day I will rewrite this story to actually, in a way that actually makes sense. But anyway, and then she has a chat with Archimedes, and she grants him a blessing. And that blessing effectively makes him immortal. Immortal in the sense that Tolkien elves are immortal, i.e. he doesn't age, he won't die from aging. Well, he does age, but he won't die from aging, right? Yeah, and that was the dragon's blessing. And then eventually I get to the point where I wrote a story where he's weary of life and asks Nineveh to rescind the blessing when he's sort of 900 and something years old. So that he can ultimately move on and go and be with his immediate family who died 800 odd years ago, you know, in the celestial planes. But yes, so Archimedes does reach the age of 900 years. The other thing is he was raised by elves, so it was another way in which ultimately I basically wanted to make an elf who was human. So he's got the elven sword, he was raised by elves, he's 900 years old, but he's human. Yes, I could have just made an elf, but you know. So the current era, one of my thoughts is to set the current era in elf in orbit name. There are other aspects to it, but they're more subtle roleplay type aspects. So there's a classic archetype of the culture of elves and personality, how they behave and that sort of thing. And from that perspective, Archimedes has always been human. I've never played him with the intent of having an elf personality, if you know what I mean. So it's those subtle aspects. He is very much human as a personality, but mechanically there are elf aspects. But he's also human in terms of the fact that he needs to sleep. He's not immune from charm spells or has advantage against charm spells, whatever it is. So there's a number of aspects, but it's not completely analogous. But I basically wanted a human who was raised by elves with an elf sword and who lived a long time. So there you go. So in terms of the current era, I could set the current era towards the end of Archimedes' life, when he's just an old sage who is there as an NPC. Or I could set it earlier in his life, sort of just after the time when he's sort of saved this child. He's married his love, and he's now fulfilling his role as guardian and he's going around the material plane, doing things that a Guardian would do, and then he's an NPC in D&D terms, but he's much younger and more active. And that's probably where I will set it. And in that case, the era immediately prior to that, more active gives me more scope, yes, indeed. And it makes him an interesting NPC. It's the you then get the old idea of, well, if Gandalf is all powerful and he can be resurrected and stuff, why doesn't he do more stuff on Middle Earth? You know, that whole thing. But anyway, so I then had to find excuses for why he's doing things, and players can't just use him. But that's fine. But if that's the current era, then we had the previous era, which relates to, and in fact, in the previous era leading up to the current era, there is a sorcerer who I have dubbed the Sorcerer of Meroeth. Meroeth being a kingdom. And this sorcerer has lived for about 800 years and has been a tyrant over the entire region. And he was responsible for the sacking of this little city where Archimedes' wife and her royal family lived, for reasons that is explained in the story and I won't get into. Yeah, exactly, as an investigator. Because the way that the Guardians exist in the modern time, in terms of the Guardians of Tempest Keep, it's more of a title rather than a job. So Tempest Keep doesn't need defending. It's a defense of the law that is existent in this place, Tempest Keep. The actual weak portals no longer need active defense. So it's a role that it is a wise council guardian who has a role to play within the continent. So yes, the current big bad, I think, or either the current one or the one from the previous era. If he's the current one, it'll be the guy that people will be ultimately fighting. If he's from the previous era, he's the guy that Archimedes defeated. So it depends. But yes, this guy is the Sorcerer of Meroeth. He's a tyrant. He commands an army of warlocks. And much more than that, I haven't really worked out. Some of his backstory feeds into some of the previous Guardians. I reckon that he started out as a storm sorcerer. And that he was cursed by one of his. He might have either Not sure whether he was one of the Guardians and turned bad, or whether he made a decision to kill the Guardians, something like that. Don't know. I did know several years ago. I've forgotten a lot of what I came up with. But it's something along those lines. I haven't really fleshed it out fully. But that's the... So he is either the current big bad that the players will have to deal with when they get to level 18 or whatever, or he will be the guy that's been defeated sort of 30, 50 years ago, and the players are dealing with the forces that are forces that have arisen in the power vacuum that's been left behind. What we then need is something between that guy and our Archmage Empire. I think. So maybe we put an extra one in there. Okay. Daughter of Mirowick? Something like that. I can't even remember how I spelled it. There you go. Interesting story, anyway. Oh, the other thing that occurred to me I'm glad you think so. The other thing that occurred to me was that as part of this Era of Elves battle, it could be that the moon is created at that point. Special mother and child to the elves are under threat or die, and mass heal made by the elves to the celestials to spare them, and they become the moons dancing across the sky. There you go. That's where the moon comes from. Right, start defining the early stages of the material plane. I think we've done that. That's something we need to do next. That's something we're working on. Layers of history. How did I get worked out? Define influence. Okay. Nope. I think at this point I'll go the imperial plane is this point. No, not there. There or there. We could do it there. Course is mentor battle split into 3 continents. I decided when I was on break that there's 3 continents. So obviously some of the elves would know a lot of lore, but how well known is it through the other species? Not very well. Because the elves would gradually become more and more reclusive. And a lot of the lore would then be locked up in the elder elves. And because the younger species live such short lives, a lot of the oral historical record, or not just oral, a lot of the historical record will be lost over time. And so you end up with myths and legends, which, if anyone were to encounter an old enough elf, they would probably get their lore corrected. But not many do that. So, yeah, some of the things that I need to do when thinking about specific stories within these battles is sort of come up with some heroes from those sort of things and turn them into legends. And those legends may then define the constellations, for instance. So, in reality, it could be that the hero at the end of the day just got old and died. But the story through time says that they were such a hero, the Celestials threw them into the sky forever. And that could be how the constellations. Well, let me I like that. So now we're starting to create a culture. So this is how some of the culture came about. Yeah, I'll be saving the VODs biscuit. All the links get put in my my Discord. Thank you for coming along. I'm glad you've been enjoying it. I probably ought to finish there. Because it's getting quite late now. It's 10 to 11. I was only originally just thinking that for note writing purposes, yes, indeed. Indeed. Although I've got most of the notes here, and there's enough here to remind me. Yeah, I'd originally expected this to only last a couple of hours, and then I'd finish there, but I've been doing 3 hours already. So anyway, what have we decided today? So we started going through the areas. So we start off with the question. If elves and dragons rule the surface, wouldn't the younger races build their cities underground? I'm not talking just a few hundred meters underground and then return to the surface once they're strong enough. No, because the elves and dragons don't rule like that. They are the elves certainly, and the metallic dragons, those that are around, would be more mentors for the younger races. But I'd imagine that they'd establish themselves fairly quickly. Thank you for coming along, Spades. It's been interesting. Harebrained ideas are great, because even if I don't go fully in that direction, it sparks an idea that brings out what we eventually come up with. Anyway, let me run through this and then I will end my stream. So we start off with before the material plane, there's a conflict between the Celestials and the Primordials over the development of the material plane. The Primordials want it removed and returned to elemental chaos, and the Celestials want to develop this material plane. The Celestials manage to force the Primordials into material bodies, and they become dragons. And this allows them to finally create the material plane. First era of the material plane is the era of the Celestials. So they create, you've got the various Celestials gradually developing their portfolios of deity portfolios. At some point, so they bring the elves in as servants to help with the creation process, right? At some point, the material plane gets invaded by the chromatic dragons. And in order to protect the plane, the Celestials expel themselves from the plane and form a barrier around it. The metallic dragons, who are now accept the fact that they're dragons, they're not primordials anymore, and the fact that the material plane exists, come through with the chromatics. They fight, and they remain to help the elves defend against the further invasions. For the resistance, the Celestials grant them the ability to shift, and they can blend in as part of the populace. And ultimately, that means that you'll get other races such as Dragonborn further down the line, and Dragon Origin sorcerers and that sort of thing. And the barrier is weak in places, and those change over time, blah blah blah. Second era of the elves, right? So the Celestials have expelled themselves, you got the elves. So they carry on living, they create their civilization. And they sort of carry on developing the world using their magic. New species come in. The elves are the mentors and the guardians for them. And then a group of elven archmages are angered by this. They wanted the material plane to themselves. So they strike a bargain with the chromatic dragons, and they agree to open portals, let them in, on the condition that they wipe out everybody else. We then have other elven mages forming a group of guardians about the portals. That relates to the Tempest Keep thing. And they start teaching magic to the younger species so they can help fend off all the renegades and the chromatic dragons. We then, at this point, some of the stories of the heroes from this battle then get turned into legend, and the legend becomes that these heroes are elevated to the sky as a memorial for their actions. But then after that, we have an era of expansion of the younger species. At some point, there's an archmage empire, possibly human. That's a bit cliche. Maybe another species. We'll see. Then we have another era that we need to decide, and then we've got the sort of more closer to present day story that I wrote previously, relating to the sorcerer Merowith and his tyrannical dominion over the world. Oh yeah, and as part of the battle with the chromatics, the single continent that was originally the material plane is split into three due to sort of elemental forces coming through the barrier and that sort of thing, and splitting things off. And so modern day there are three continents, and each will eventually have their own cultures, and develop their own subtle different legends, and probably have their own eras and empires. And that's something that we'll focus on next time. That was actually quite a lot. Let me switch over to this screen here so you see my face. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you for your ideas. And I hope that was enjoyable. The plan for the time being is to do these on Fridays until mid-February, when Biscuit runs a campaign that we will be streaming. If you... Yeah, my bot tells me it's time to end stream. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. my time, UK time, I will be doing some more Guild Wars 2, playing with Mike, and so join us for that. And we'll be doing some more on Sunday about 4 hours earlier. So join us for that as well. Yeah. Thank you very much. I bid you good night.